Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Studying Law Around the World. Today, I get to speak with Alex Munoz, who has an incredible experience in a very interesting area of law. He works with education law. And to start us off today, Alex, thanks again for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you became involved in education law?
Yeah, thank you, Claudio. I'm really honored. Thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast. I've listened to a few of the episodes, with just great information that you're sharing with the whole legal community, and I really appreciate the fact that you asked me to join you today. I'm the oldest son of immigrant parents that came from Colombia in the early 1970s. I'm proud to say that I was the first in my family to graduate from university here in Canada. I grew up in the East End of Toronto in the Scarborough area. I started my career in a small firm in Toronto. I have to say that I was incredibly fortunate to landed a firm that valued me and provided lots of room for mentorship and professional growth. I didn't know at the time that when I went for the job interview that I'd end up articling and practicing law for with one of the pioneers of education law here in Ontario, a gentleman by the name of Bill Markle. Actually, if you don't mind, Claudia, I'd like to tell like a really quick story about Bill.
Please do go right ahead.
Thank you. I consider him to be, one of the true gentleman barristers in our profession. To make a long story short, my first day of articling was not spent at the office. Bill actually asked me to meet him at a small town outside of Toronto because he was finishing up Superior Court of Justice judge alone trial. And, aside from everything else that happened today, one thing that I'll never forget is one of the submissions that was made by the assistant crown attorney to the court in to bolster the crown's case. And this was a criminal case, and of course the crown has the onus of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the accused committed the offense. And the crown, in trying to make his point that the witnesses were credible because they had withstood cross examination, quote, from one of the best lawyers in the province, end quote. And I just remember, and that I'll never forget that moment because it just made me feel, incredibly proud that I'd be learning and observing on how to be a lawyer from one of the best in the profession. So, I practiced law with Bill and others at the firm for the first 11 years of my career. I represented teachers in criminal and civil cases, as well as before their professional body, the College of Teachers, on many, many cases across that time. And then in 2018, I made a move and joined the legal services department at the Toronto District School Board. I moved in house, I worked my way up to associate general counsel position at the largest school board in Canada, one of the largest in North America. I love my time over there at TDSB. I worked closely with school administrators and leaders throughout the system. I learned so much from all the incredible people that are dedicated to public education at TDSB, and quite frankly, from others across the system because I did, had a lot of contact with others in different school boards as well. And their demonstrated passion for public education was bar none. I worked with all the different departments at the board, all the way up to the director's office. And so that was, an incredible experience and learning and advising the people with such passion for working with, and, not only young people, not only young students, but also, TDSB has 100,000 adult learners. So it's quite incredible. And after seven plus years at the Toronto District School Board, I decided it was a change. I decided it was time for a change, and I joined one of Canada's leading employment and labor firms that represents the employers management side, Sherrard Kuzz LLP. Quite frankly, I've been here for a short time. Everybody here is incredible. The firm has a robust practice representing schools, school boards, universities in a wide range of areas, including employment law, labor law, human rights, investigations, health and safety, privacy, workplace safety and insurance. And so, now that I've joined Sherrard Kuzz, I'm brought now my expertise in education law to the firm and looking to build up that practice. And so I'm quite excited for the future.
Amazing. That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that story. That's so meaningful. I'm sure, all of us going through this process are just, a little extra happy to know that those that are teaching us are reputable people, and it's not something that you would see as up straight. So I'm so glad you shared that. That's so interesting. And since you mentioned education law and how your practice evolved and all of that in your current practice today, can you tell me a little more of what actually is education law?
Yeah, I know it's a great question, and trust me, I've had the question posed quite a few times throughout my career. It's kind of a loaded question, and what I mean by that is that education law encompasses many different disciplines, including labor and employment law, public law, administrative law, criminal law, corporate commercial, family law, children's rights, human rights law, privacy law. It's just real estate law. There's just so many different practices that not that you need to be an expert in all those practices, but quite frankly, they're just all of the legal issues that come up at school boards, universities, which, as an education lawyer, you need to be well versed in terms of the different legislation, in terms of the leading case law. There's just so much. It really is. And, when we're talking about, all the legal matters relating to education, you're talking about not just, of course, the rights and the obligations of the school board, but you're also talking about the rights of students, teachers, traders. So there's just there's a multitude of issues that come up almost on a daily basis. And in terms of legislation, the main piece of legislation that governs the public education system, kindergarten to grade 12 in Ontario, is the Education Act. And I actually am the editor of the Annotated Ontario Education Act. I've been the editor since now 2013, I believe. 13 years and going. When I look at the act, the first thing I think about is section 0.1, sub one of the Education Act, which states that, quote, a strong public education system is the foundation of a prosperous, caring, and civil society, end quote. And the reason I bring that up is, again, when talking about education, we really got to think about who is it meant for. And what I mean by that is we're talking about over 2 million students, about just under 4,000 elementary schools, and if I remember correctly, about 883 secondary schools across the province, like in terms of public education, because there also is, private education as well. And that's separate, but it is still something that I also practice in terms of representing administrators in private education and private systems. And it's just, as legal counsel to a school board, you receive, as I mentioned earlier, all kinds of inquiries from senior staff, including, the director, associate directors, superintendents. You also deal with different, senior managers in the different departments, such as professional support services or facility services. And you also deal directly with the school leaders. And what I mean by that is the principals and the vice principals on almost a daily basis. There were times, Claudio, that I would receive 15 or more general advice matters that would come in, when things were very, very busy at the school board, and all kinds of legal issues relating to school registrations, admissions, guardianship issues, family law and custodial, or rather now is referred to as the decision-making responsibility, issues with respect to the Children's Law Reform Act, the Ontario Student Records Guidelines, parental management issues, withdrawal from parental consent. There's just so much to consider when practicing in education law.
That's amazing. That's amazing because I'm sure it's easy to be simplistic when you're just thinking about, what is this area of law, what's that area of law, but I can only imagine how many different areas really end up, becoming a part of it, all the way from administrative law to privacy. And well, you said, well, you named, well, quite a few of those. So that's quite incredible. And You mentioned a few different areas that you got the chance to work on, and then now you work at a firm that also does other areas, even though you lead the education practice. So, if I may ask you, how is education law then different from other areas that you've been involved in before?
Claudio, that's a great question, and it's not much different. And what I mean by that is that education law is client centered. I've always said to advocate effectively and build trust and credibility with your clients, including management side education law clients. An education lawyer has to know and understand their world, the principals and the vice principals, the school leaders that are on the front line that have to deal with not only the students and staff at their schools, but also the community, also other advocates. It's just incredible the amount of work that they do. And so when they're coming to you and they're asking for advice, yes, some of it is non-legal. But really, when they're coming to you, is because there is an issue, there is a legal issue, and you need to know in terms of what they're dealing with and how to provide the best advice to those clients. I've also, because of my criminal law backgrounds, I was, I did a lot of work with the caring and safe school staff there at TDSB, including centrally assigned principals, the executive superintendent, and other school administrators. And, that had to do with issues concerning student discipline, privacy obligations regarding the Youth Criminal Justice Act, just a multitude of issues that you have to deal with. And really, again, as I said before, you have to know their world in terms of what they're dealing with in order to provide the best advice possible.
Amazing. It's so interesting how the practice of law really does look alike in some ways, even in spanning through different areas. So thank you for sharing that. And going on to this topic, considering what you've mentioned previously about all the regulations that regulate education and all of this context, I also wonder what are some of the most pressing legal issues that affect schools?
No, that's a great question again, Claudio. Just last week, there was a report released by the Ontario Human Rights Commission. It's a report that addressed anti Black racism in schools. And it's not just, again, elementary schools, secondary schools, but it really was a look into systemic anti Black racism and calling on the government, calling on the school boards, the unions and universities to, take a greater action in dealing with anti Black racism. I believe that report I believe it was 29 recommendations, and it had timelines for the implementation in terms of dismantling anti Black racism. So, and it's not just anti-Black racism, but just, anti-oppression issues and issues with respect to other ethnicities. It's again under the Human Rights Code, all students, including Black students and young persons, are entitled to an education system that does not discriminate. And so we all are aware of that, and we all have to do better, quite frankly, in terms of addressing those issues. And that was a report that the hope is that a lot of the recommendations will be implemented. And so that's one example. Another, the rising toll of harassment and assault of educators. Actually, my colleague Angela Powell and I are going to be presenting at a conference at the Ontario Public School Boards Association. Their labor relations and human resources symposium, and this is the actual topic that we're going to be discussing in terms of the fact that incidents of assault and harassment of educators has been growing at an alarming rate, and that quite frankly this troubling trend has taken a toll on the mental health and workplace satisfaction of educators, not just teachers, but we're also talking about early childhood educators, educational assistants. Quite frankly, it's an epidemic that needs to be addressed, and we are going to do our best to be able to provide best practices and discuss this issue, hopefully being able to have the school board better understand their legal obligations to support staff safety and mental well-being. And another major issue, if I can, and I'll just briefly touch about this. Next week, I'm actually attending a conference in Banff. It's a conference that's put on by it's called Counsel, the Canadian Association for the practical study of law and education. They're Canada's Education Law Association. And I'm super looking forward to meeting with colleagues across the country and some great discussion and topics and the speakers that are going to be presenting. I'm also going to be, honored to be one of the presenters there with another one of my colleagues, Jim Molos here at Sherrard Kuzz, and we're going to be discussing the reasonable expectation of privacy in the school board context. So again, issues with respect to privacy are issues that school board personnel have to deal with almost on a daily basis. So I'm really looking forward to that as well.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us both about your area of practice, about how education law works, and also thank you for mentioning about this conference you'll be participating. And to wrap up today's episode, if I were to ask you, what piece of advice would you give to, a law student, somebody who's just joining the workforce now, and that, is really thinking about how can I make the most out of my career, out of the profession? What would you tell them?
Quite frankly, the best piece of advice that I could give is to seek out mentors who guide you, who share their experience, who provide valuable insights into the practice of law. Now, I appreciate that not everyone will have the same experience that I had as an artist student and a young lawyer. However, there are others. I know that there's a lot of others that would be happy to share their knowledge with the next generation, with the young lawyers, article students, and I have to say, in turn, when you become a more seasoned lawyer, you should be willing to share your wisdom with the younger lawyers, making their way up the noble profession. So that's the advice that I would provide.
That's very, very interesting. And I hope you all took some notes. And thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to today's podcast. And please check it out on the link below, the information about Alex's bio, the website for his firm. And we'll see you all in the next episode.